Nicholas II was the last Tsar of Russia. He was born on the 18th of May 1868 at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo during the reign of his grandfather, Tsar Alexander II. He was the eldest child of 6 siblings. His father was Tsarevich Alexander Alexandrovich, the heir apparent to the Russian throne, and his mother was Princess Dagmar of Denmark, who changed her name to Maria Fyodorovna after marriage. She was the daughter of King Christian IX of Denmark. Nicholas spent most of his childhood years at Anishkov Palace. Nicholas and his siblings were brought up in simplicity and modesty. His parents were happily married, so Nicholas grew up in a very loving and harmonious environment. On the morning of the 13th of March 1881, his grandfather, Tsar Alexander II, was killed by a bomb attack. His father ascended to the throne as Tsar Alexander III, and Nicholas became the new Tsarevich, or the new heir apparent to the Russian throne. For security reasons, the new Tsar and his family relocated their primary residence to the Gatchina Palace, about 40 kilometers from St. Petersburg. There, Nicholas would grow up and spend his youth. On the 15th of June 1884 in St. Petersburg, his uncle Grand Duke Sergei married Princess Elizabeth, the daughter of Grand Duke Ludwig IV of Hesse and by Rhine, and a granddaughter of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. At the wedding, the 16-year-old Nicholas met with the 12-year-old Princess Alex, the bride's younger sister. The feelings of admiration blossomed into love when Alex visited her sister Elizabeth in St. Petersburg 5 years later in 1889. Nicholas wrote in his diary, "It is my dream to one day marry Alex. I have loved her for a long time, but more deeply and strongly since 1889, when she spent 6 weeks in Petersburg." In 1890, his father and mother decided to send Nicholas on a world tour to complete his education by seeing the world. Nicholas left Gatchina with his brother George on the 4th of November 1890. They first went by warship to Athens, where they were joined by their cousin, Prince George of Greece. They then went on a journey around the greater part of the Eurasian continent, but his brother George fell ill and was sent home partway through the trip. During his visit to Japan, an assassination attempt was made on Nicholas. He was attacked by Suda Sanso, one of his escorting policemen, who swung at his face with a saber. Nicholas's cousin, Prince George, quickly parried the second blow with his cane and saved Nicholas's life. Nicholas was left with a 9-centimeter long scar on the right side of his forehead, but his wound was not life-threatening. However, the incident cut his trip short and he returned home early. Nicholas's father was concerned that Nicholas was too gentle and naive to become a Tsar. Even though Nicholas was heir apparent to the throne, his father failed to prepare him for his future role as Tsar. As his father was only in his 40s, it was expected that it would be many years before Nicholas succeeded to the throne. His father assumed that he would live a long life and had years to prepare Nicholas for becoming Tsar. However, by 1894, his father's health was failing. Nicholas had long had his heart set on marrying Princess Alex of Hesse. However, neither his father nor his mother approved of the match. They found Alex shy and somewhat peculiar. They were also concerned that the young princess was not possessed of the right character to be Tsarina of Russia. It was only when his father's health was beginning to fail that they reluctantly gave permission for Nicholas to propose so that he could secure the succession. Nicholas was ecstatic and immediately inquired about Alex. However, despite her love for Nicholas, Alex was initially reluctant to marry Nicholas because she didn't want to renounce her Lutheran faith to join the Orthodox Church. She wrote to Nicholas, "What happiness can come from a marriage which begins without the real blessing of God?" Nicholas was devastated, but he remained hopeful. In April 1894, Nicholas joined his uncle Sergei and Aunt Elizabeth on a journey to Germany for the wedding of Elizabeth's and Alex's brother, Grand Duke Ernst Ludwig of Hesse. Nicholas was determined to persuade Alex to marry him. The day after his arrival in Coburg, Nicholas proposed to Alex and tried for 2 hours to persuade her to convert to Orthodoxy. She wept continuously but refused. Her sister Elizabeth spoke to her afterwards and tried to convince her. Alex eventually changed her mind and she accepted Nicholas's second proposal. Nicholas and Alex became officially engaged on the 20th of April 1894. By that autumn, his father, Tsar Alexander III, was dying. Upon learning that his days were numbered, Alexander had Nicholas summon Alex to the Livadia Palace to receive his blessing. Alex arrived on the 22nd of October. Despite being exceedingly weak, Alexander insisted on receiving Alex in full dress uniform. Soon after, his health began to deteriorate more rapidly. Tsar Alexander III died on the 1st of November 1894, and Nicholas became Tsar of Russia at the age of 26. The following day, Alex was received into the Russian Orthodox Church, taking the name Alexandra Fyodorovna with the title of Grand Duchess. After leaving Livadia on the 6th of November and traveling to St. Petersburg, the funeral was held on the 19th of November. Their wedding was originally scheduled for the spring of 1895, but the surprising death of Alexander III made it necessary for the new Tsar to get married quickly. Their wedding took place on the 26th of November 1894, which was the birthday of the Dowager Tsarina Maria Fyodorovna, and court mourning could be slightly relaxed. Nicholas and Alexandra were second cousins. They both were great-grandchildren of Grand Duke Ludwig II of Hesse and Grand Duchess Wilhelmina, who was by birth a princess of Baden. A year later, their first child, Grand Duchess Olga Nikolaevna, was born on the 15th of November 1895. They were overjoyed and insisted that they were not disappointed that their first child was not a boy. Nicholas said, "I am glad that our child is a girl. Had it been a boy, he would have belonged to the people. Being a girl, she belongs to us." After lengthy preparations, the coronation took place on the 26th of May 1896 in the Mission Cathedral in the Moscow Kremlin. However, the celebration was overshadowed by a crowd crash that occurred 4 days later at Kotinka Field, where hundreds of thousands of people waited to receive gifts and food on the occasion of the coronation. During the autumn after the coronation, Nicholas and Alexandra made a tour of Europe and took possession of their new yacht, the Standard, which had been built in Denmark. From there, they made a journey to Scotland to spend some time with Alexandra's grandmother, Queen Victoria, at Balmoral Castle. Queen Victoria met her daughter Olga for the first time and said, "The baby is magnificent." After Grand Duchess Olga, Nicholas and Alexandra would have 3 more daughters. Grandasis Tatiana in 1897, Grandasis Maria in 1899, and Grandasis Anastasia in 1901. However, the nation and their extended families were disappointed, as there was no heir yet, until finally in 1904, the long-awaited heir, Tsarevich Alexei, was born. His birth was greeted with widespread joy. However, the joy of the newborn boy was short-lived, as they realized that Alexei suffered from the incurable hemophilia that he had inherited from his mother. As the incurable illness threatened the sole son and heir of the Tsar, Nicholas and Alexandra chose to keep secret Alexei's condition. Even within the household, many were unaware of the exact nature of his illness. At first, they turned to doctors to treat Alexei, but their treatments generally failed, until one day a Russian mystic and holy man from Siberia appeared, Grigory Rasputin. Apparently, Rasputin was able to cure Alexei by praying for him. Over time, Alexandra grew to believe that Rasputin was the only man who could save her son's life, and he quickly gained great influence over Alexandra. Soon, it turned into various rumors. Aside from Alexei's illness, the family was happy and harmonious. Nicholas and Alexandra were devoted to each other, and the children were close to one another and to their parents. In February 1913, Nicholas presided over the tercentenary celebrations for the Romanov dynasty. The success of the celebration nurtured a stronger confidence in Nicholas's ambitions of a popular autocracy. As he said, "My people love me." On the 28th of June 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife, Duchess Sophie, were assassinated by a Bosnian Serb nationalist in Sarajevo, which sparked the First World War. Russia was eventually thrown into the war. Although Nicholas commanded the largest army in the war in terms of numbers, in every other aspect, however, Russia was unprepared for war. By early 1917, Russia was on the verge of total collapse. The sense of failure and imminent disaster was everywhere. The pressure of the revolution became too great, and on the advice of the generals, Nicholas abdicated on the 15th of March 1917. He renounced the throne on behalf of himself and his son, Tsarevich Alexei Nikolaevich, in favor of his brother, Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich. When Michael refused the crown, the 3 centuries of the Romanov dynasty's rule in Russia came to an end. Nicholas and his family were then held under house arrest in the Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo. The British government offered the family asylum, but the offer was withdrawn following objections by Nicholas's cousin, King George V, who thought that Nicholas's presence might trigger a revolution there too. Nicholas and his family were then moved to the former governor's mansion in Tobolsk in August 1917. After the Bolsheviks took power in the October Revolution, they were moved to the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg in 1918. In the early hours of the 17th of July 1918, The family was awakened around 2 a.m., got dressed, and were let down into a half-basement room at the back of the Ipatiev house. Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children, along with their doctor and 3 of their servants who had voluntarily chosen to remain with the family, were then be executed. Nicholas died at the age of 50. Nicholas and his family were then canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church as passion bearers.